The sun was beginning to set in South Africa's Marrakech National Park, the sky slowly taking on a veil of crimson. The vast expanses of golden grasslands stretching to the horizon offered a sight both wild and captivating. A herd of elephants strode slowly through this tranquil natural scene. At the head of the herd walked an old but still powerful male elephant with long white tusks and wrinkled gray skin. 5 female elephants followed, their eyes scanning the surroundings intently, listening for every sound. While Marrakech National Park is renowned for its rich biodiversity, it is a dangerous area frequently visited by poachers. Snares set for rhino horns in particular often pose a lethal threat to other animals. As they moved deeper into the forest, the herd walked calmly, oblivious to the approaching danger. The male elephant, the leader of the herd, suddenly detected a distinct scent in the air. His nostrils flared, his ears slightly flared, and he stepped alertly from the herd. He took a few steps, crunching through the grass before stopping in the shade of a tree. But at that very moment, he felt a sharp pain in his leg. His ankle was caught in a sturdy steel trap hidden in the ground. The sudden snap of the metal cracked, a crack that shattered the forest silence. The old elephant bellowed in pain. The deep sound echoed through the trees. The female elephants suddenly flinched and ran quickly in the direction of their leader's voice. As they all surrounded him, fear and anxiety were evident in their eyes. Their leader tried to move, but with each step, the steel trap cut deeper, dripping blood onto the ground. The male elephant raised his trunk, sniffed the air, and groaned. His eyes narrowed in pain. The female elephants circled him with their trunks, some fidgeting with the ground, trying to find a way out. One, sensing their leader's pain, tried to wrap his trunk around the trapped leg, but this effort only caused more pain. Deep in the forest, the sun had set. The daylight was fading and the shadows were growing. At that moment, the elephant herd became aware not only of nature, but also of man's cruelty. This trap was originally designed for rhinos. The trap's steel jaws were incredibly strong, making it nearly impossible for an animal to escape on its own. With each passing minute, the old male elephant's strength diminished. His breathing became harsh and labored, his eyelids drooping with exhaustion. As time went by, his body began to sink deeper into the ground, but the herd never abandoned him. 5 female elephants surrounded their leader like a shield. They sniffed with their trunks, followed his footprints, but their primary focus was on the male elephant's wound. One tried to cover the trap with soil, while the others gently cleaned their friend's wound with their trunks. The day had shifted from the cool of the morning to the scorching heat of the afternoon, but no elephant had left. They were no longer just a herd, but the silent, patient members of a close-knit family. By late afternoon, the forest was bathed in a red light. The wind whispered through the leaves and the shadows began to lengthen. Then suddenly the sound of an engine pierced the silence. The familiar voice belonged to Cabello, a conservationist. Every day at the end of his shift, Cabello patrolled Marrakech National Park, monitoring the balance of nature. Today he was on his way back. But that day, a faint groaning sound, carried by the wind, unsettled him. He turned the steering wheel, followed the sound, and slowly pulled the car to the side. Opening the door and stepping out, he was stunned by the sight before him. Before his eyes, an old male elephant's front leg was trapped in a massive iron trap. The animal's eyes were half closed, his breathing labored. Just behind him stood 5 large female elephants. Their eyes were fixed on Cabello. They raised their trunks slightly, sniffing, assessing the stranger in their midst. None appeared aggressive, but each was clearly alert. Cabello quickly analyzed the situation. The trap was made of thick steel and had clearly been planted by poachers. Looking at its construction, he realized it was an illegal trap, specifically targeting rhinos. At that moment, deep within his heart, he felt a surge of anger and despair. This old giant was yet another victim of human greed. The sky was darkening rapidly. As the forest began to absorb the last glimmer of sunlight and give way to night, a sense of anxiety blossomed within Cabello. Time was running out. He had no time to return to headquarters and call for help. And worst of all, the poachers could return at any moment. If this old male elephant wasn't rescued, the hunters, seeing the trap still working, might return and kill him. The possibility haunted Cabello. This giant animal was still alive, and looking into its eyes, it was clear he was clinging to life. Cabello opened his pack and pulled out the light narcotics rifle he always carried. Perhaps he should have used it in an emergency, but he decided to carefully observe the giant's reactions. He raised his hands and began to approach slowly. He took each step with caution, keeping his body as open as possible to demonstrate his non-threatening nature. The 5 female elephants watched the man's movements closely. Their ears perked slightly and their trunks flared. One of them let out a deep growl, but none of them attacked. Cabello's calm and determination seemed to have quelled their anger as well. The male elephant looked at the man's face. He was in pain, but he no longer groaned. He understood, almost intuitively, that this man had come to help. His eyelids slowly opened, and he lifted his head, even just the slightest bit. Emboldened by this look, Cabello laid down his rifle. He was now completely defenseless. But it was the right thing to do. Sweat streamed from his forehead, down his cheeks, and down the back of his shirt. His heart was pounding, but his hands were resolute. He dropped to his knees and carefully examined the thick, rusty chain wrapped around the old elephant's ankle. The leg was now completely swollen and bloodied. The iron jaws of the trap had sunk into the skin, damaging the tissue. Cabello took a deep breath as if he had inhaled all the carbon dioxide of the forest. When he reached for the iron, he was momentarily startled by the presence of the cold metal. The elephant's blood had coagulated around the trap. The chain's links seemed to torture not the flesh of an animal, but nature itself. Cabello used both hands to search for the trap's hinge. He pressed, twisted, and tried to push it with his fingers. The metal wouldn't budge. The female elephants watched his efforts in amazement. One of them took a step forward, raising her trunk, but the others stopped her. Cabello's voice rose at that moment. "Okay, I'm here. I'll help you. Please hang on," he said softly but firmly. Of course, the elephant didn't understand him, but the sincerity in his tone resonated with every living creature in the forest. And Cabello continued to push the trap with all his might. Time seemed to stand still. Every second was precious to the old elephant's life. The trap's teeth were still gripping his leg, but despite the pain, the massive animal held firm. His breathing became labored at times, his body trembling, yet he held his ground. He held on, perhaps out of instinctive hope, perhaps thanks to the family surrounding him who had never left him alone. 4 of the 5 female elephants rushed forward as if to offer assistance. But the oldest and most experienced of them raised his trunk to stop them. His eyes were fixed on Cabello. He seemed to be trying to understand the stranger's intentions. There was a hint of suspicion, but also a strange sense of trust in his gaze. Nature could sometimes communicate without words. For nearly 15 minutes, Cabello struggled with the infernal machine of steel. His fingers were bleeding, his arms exhausted. But finally, he found the hinge, used his elbow to force it, and the trap opened with a cracking sound. The moment the male elephant's leg was freed, a resounding roar shook the ground. It wasn't an expression of pain, but a wild yet dignified cry of survival. The elephant's leg was still bleeding. There were no scabbed wounds. It was fresh, open, and painful, but at least the chain was gone. Death had been pushed back a little further. Cabello grabbed the trap and raced back to his vehicle. Once he'd thrown it into the trunk, he grabbed the first aid kit and returned. He knelt down beside the massive body. He tried to operate it without shaking, but with every step he cursed. Those who set these traps, they don't deserve this pain. He soaked cotton balls in alcohol and began cleaning the area around the wound. Blood mixed with the cotton balls and dripped onto the ground. The female elephants watched him in surprise and a touch of amazement. It was as if they had never witnessed such a careful and compassionate human touch. Cabello wrapped the bandage around the elephant without tearing its skin. His movements were slow, balanced, and respectful, as if he were performing a sacred ritual, a natural ritual. He paused for a moment, wiped the sweat from his brow, and listened to the old elephant's breathing. It was more rhythmic, more regular now. "It's working," he murmured. Then he prepared a mild stimulant injection. This would stimulate the elephant's circulatory system and accelerate its recovery. When he gently touched the needle to its skin, the elephant flinched briefly, but didn't respond. It simply opened its eyes slightly. The weary warrior within him was still there. Cabello turned to the 5 female elephants standing around him. They watched him like silent, giant shadows. He sent them a heartfelt thank you with a slight bow. They might not have understood what they were saying, but the language of these glances was much deeper. The language of trust, compassion, and that fragile connection with nature. As the sky gradually darkened, a cold wind began to blow through the forest. The leaves on the trees were shivering, nature preparing for the night. Cabello lifted the collar of his shirt and shivered slightly. Time was now against him. After administering the injection, he quickly put the medical supplies he had in his bag, but the adrenaline still lingered. He struggled to keep his hand steady, his heartbeat echoing in his ears. As he walked toward the car, he paused for a moment and looked back. The old male elephant was still lying on the ground, but his leg was now carefully bandaged. The majestic giant stood there, held there by the weight of nature, but he no longer looked helpless, only tired. About 10 minutes passed. The mild medicine had begun to circulate within his massive body. Then the elephant's trunk shifted slightly. His trunk slowly lifted from the ground, his ears quivering slightly. Then he slowly stood up, his feet planted in the ground. He stumbled a little. He tried to adjust to his bandaged leg, but he didn't fall. As his trunk rose from the ground, it was as if even the trees bowed in respect. At that moment, 5 female elephants approached without hesitation. They surrounded the elderly leader, silently and carefully. Some offered support with their trunks, others simply stood by, offering reassurance. He was no longer alone. The herd was complete. At that moment, it was as if an invisible breath had been exhaled from deep within the forest. A silent but powerful sense of relief spread, both among the elephants and within Cabello's heart. Cabello stood at a distance, intently observing the proceedings. Was everything all right? Was his foot going to bleed again? At that moment, the old male elephant turned his head and looked directly at Cabello. This look was different. There was neither anger nor fear in it. It was as if there was deep gratitude, a heavy yet delicate thankfulness in those eyes. A bond had formed between them. One human, one animal, one savior, the other a fragile giant of nature. Those few seconds of gaze warmed Cabello's heart. He blinked, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He bowed his head slightly, saying his farewell. Then he silently retreated, leaving the area without disturbing the elephant's rhythm. He got into his car. When he turned the ignition, the roar of the engine momentarily shattered the silence of the forest. But this time, the sound wasn't an invasion, but a farewell. As he set off, he glanced back in the rear-view mirror once more. The elephants were still there. One waved its trunk gently. Perhaps this too was a form of greeting. And as Cabello drove along the dusty road into the night, he carried an unforgettable bond in his heart, with nature, with loyalty, and with a silent thank you. The entire herd stopped in their tracks, staring intently at the car. As the engine faded away, the elephants continued to watch, motionless. When the vehicle finally disappeared behind the dust clouds, Maracaibo Forest slowly enveloped itself in night. The sky darkened, the leaves grew silent, and only the distant calls of nightbirds echoed. But that night was not just the end of a day, it was the beginning of a friendship. From that day on, the moment he rescued the old elephant left an indelible mark on Cabello's heart. Every evening, returning from his patrol, he made sure to stop by the edge of that old path. He would slow his vehicle, roll down the window, close his eyes, and listen to the sounds carried on the wind. The whisper of leaves, the call of a distant bird, and sometimes, deep within, the soft growl of an elephant. One day, just as the sun was beginning to set, he caught sight of movement. A large trunk appeared in the distance, amidst the undergrowth. It was the old male elephant. His injured leg was now a little steadier. He didn't approach her, just stood there, his head slightly bowed. In the background, 4 of the 5 female elephants waited intently, not anxious but wary. Cabello immediately sensed a significance in this encounter. He smiled. "This is him," he said quietly in his heart. "The friend who trusted me that day, who looked me in the eye." The same thing happened again the next day. As Cabello's vehicle drove, the older male elephant followed him from a distance for about 5 kilometers. He didn't approach, just continued in the same direction. Then he stopped. He stared at it for a long time, then silently disappeared into the undergrowth. Cabello knew this was no coincidence. This was a thank you in the language of nature, a gratitude expressed not in words, but in action. And this simple, wordless friendship deepened his love for nature every day. Over time, these silent encounters became a habit. Cabello was no longer just a conservationist. He was someone who had touched the heart of nature. In that old elephant's eyes, whenever they met again, he felt a deep sense of camaraderie, a fragile yet genuine bond. And this bond was one of the purest relationships that could be formed between human and animal. Every day, as he journeyed through this sacred forest, Cabello whispered the same thing to himself. Thank you, my friend. Dear friend, thank you for reading this story to the end. If you believe in this special bond between humans and nature, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. See you in the next story.